Hello, all. It's Michael Laxer. I'm the editor of the Left Chapter. I'm coming to you today from Toronto, March 23rd. So, what I wanted to talk about today is the long standing history of Western and corporate imperialist media uh, making it out as if the victims of aggression in the global south are, in fact, the aggressors. And, nowhere are we seeing this in a more pronounced way. In fact, in the most pronounced way that I've seen in quite some time, than in the ongoing U.S. Israeli war on Iran. If you didn't know any better, reading the Western media, reading the statements made by the United States and Israel and its officials and its leaders, reading the responses by various leaders of the Gulf states. If you didn't know any better, you would think that it was Iran who had launched the attacks on the United States and Israel over 20 days ago, as opposed to what actually happened was that unprovoked and without a declaration of war, the United States and Israel launched a surprise attack on Iran. A surprise attack that, within its first 24 hours, killed almost 200 school children and also murdered, assassinated Iran's supreme leader and various members of his family. And yet, of course, when Iran has responded to these attacks and to the ongoing attacks by Israel and the United States on its territory and on its people and on its infrastructure, when Iran has responded to this, it's framed as if Iran is the one who's being aggressive. This is a complete inversion of reality. It's totally absurd, and it serves to act as a kind of justification for Western and imperial aggression, and a justification for what is, in fact, under international law, completely illegal and unjustifiable, which are these ongoing attacks. And now, of course, this assault on Iran is not by it's far from the only case where this has happened historically. We see it all the time. A classic example that's gone on over many decades are the sanctions and various pressures that have been applied against the DPRK, the Democratic People's Republic of Korea, as it sought to build an arsenal to defend itself against U.S. aggression, so that it's developing of a nuclear deterrence is framed as if it is an entirely aggressive act. And we'll come back to this later, you could make a very strong argument that the only reason that Pyongyang has not been bombed at various points over the last 10 to 15 years is precisely because the DPRK has nuclear weapons due to the wisdom, in hindsight, of their leadership. Now, in the case of Iran, there is an excellent article that was published on the Left Chapter recently by Ali Abutalebi. Ali is he's the executive director of Mazmoon Books, and he's the founder of the Iranian Campaign for Solidarity with Cuba. And he wrote an article entitled "Iran Has the Right to Defend Itself." Now, I mean, this is an article which one would think was kind of stating the obvious, but in the context of the way that the media and political powers that be attempt to do a complete 180 on what's actually going on, it's not as perfectly obvious as one might think. What what he argues is that blaming Iran for responding to military attacks ignores the fact that under international law, states possess an inherent right of self-defense when an armed attack occurs against them. This right, he notes, does not depend on diplomatic approval or political sympathy. It arises from the factual reality of force being used. used. And, self-defense is therefore not an exception to international norms, but one of their foundational principles. And of course, this also has to include defensive retaliation by the Iranians against American bases, infrastructure, assets, etc., in the Gulf states, despite the fact that the Gulf states and the media have portrayed these defensive maneuvers, these defensive actions as a form of aggression. What exactly is Iran supposed to do? If you took what the Western media and the Western political elite says at face value, Iran's only recourse would be to, do nothing. So what you would get from the way Iranian self-defense actions are being framed is that any attempt of the country to protect its own citizens and to defend itself by knocking out the capacity of those who are attacking it to do this, to defend itself, is somehow a form of aggression. Now, what we have to take into account, and this narrative has been used to destroy, countries that did not play ball with Western imperialism, countries like Libya in 2011, countries like Syria, basically any country that has not acted like Airstrip 1 for Western imperialism has been a target of Western undermining, Western attack, so that they could create a kind of overall regional compliance in which all of the actors kowtow and play ball with Western and then ultimately Israeli imperial objectives. We saw what happened in the case of both Libya and Syria, and we see now that what were states that were bulwarks against Western aggression and Israeli aggression regionally are now states that are ruled by warlords that have undergone sort of social collapse and that are completely powerless to defend themselves and to defend their interests against either imperial aggression or against internal turmoil. And this, of course, was entirely the objective of undermining the governments that were in place prior to their downfall and to the present situation. So, I think it's important that to emphasize this tremendous hypocrisy that we see in every time that there's a conflict involving the United States or the West, because when this framing is allowed to go unchallenged, it does in fact completely justify what are the U.S. and Israeli alleged grounds for their actions. So when we and when the Western media unthinkingly, and that's what it is, sort of says, well, now that the Iranians are bombing all these assets and hitting targets in central Israel and targeting U.S. military bases in the Gulf states and targeting diplomatic assets. Now that Iran's doing that, the world needs to be calling on Iran to end its aggression. And the absurdity of this should be abundantly clear, and it needs to be called out. But in addition to that, and going back to the example of the Democratic People's Republic of Korea, When the West and Israel behaves in the way that it has, flaunting international law, participating, in open aggression against Iran in this case, earlier in the case of the United States, in the blatantly illegal attack on Venezuela and the kidnapping of Venezuela's president and first combatant, Nicolas Maduro and Celia Flores. You know, when these actions are taken and are allowed to go unchallenged because allegedly the Venezuelan leader was corrupt, undemocratic, and a drug dealer. None of these accusations are true. Or because Iran supposedly was on the verge of aggression, even though there's absolutely no evidence that this was the case. When these narratives are allowed to go unchallenged, it makes the strongest conceivable argument for countries in the global south to do whatever it is they can do to build up an arsenal against the possibility of this type of aggression, including a nuclear arsenal. And as I alluded to previously, in the case of the leadership of the DPRK, they heavily prioritized creating a nuclear deterrent for the very reason that it was perfectly clear that if they didn't do this, at some point, they would be a target. And, the statements made over the decades by the United States towards the DPRK made this abundantly clear. So they took the actions necessary to create the kind of deterrence that has prevented anywhere even close to a serious type of aggression against the country. And this is for the obvious reason that deterrence exists. We're seeing that Iran's deterrence against Western U.S. and Israeli imperial aggression was stronger and was greater than these powers, than these countries anticipated, than the leadership of these countries anticipated. And of course, going forward, Iran's going to have nothing but the most powerful incentive to rebuild this arsenal of missiles and drones and to pursue more powerful forms of deterrence. Would be a perfectly natural, perfectly obvious, and perfectly understandable path for them to pursue. And it is a path of self-defense. I think it is tremendously important for people on the left, for people who are especially in the imperial center, to counter these narratives and to say that it is not wrong for countries to defend themselves against the actions of the United States, Israel, and other Western powers, regardless of the alleged motives behind U.S., Israeli, or Western aggression. It is perfectly legal under international law, perfectly understandable, and perfectly morally and ethically correct for these countries to defend themselves. And as leftists, we need to stand up and say that the real thing that has to be ended is the impunity with which the West, Israel, and the United States acts with absolutely no consequence and in flagrant violation over and over again of international law, and that this is what is the problem internationally and globally. This is what is destabilizing not only the Middle East, but the entire world. And this is what is leading us closer and closer to the terrible possibility of a more global conflict, and even most horrifically, of the kind of a cascade effect that could end in nuclear war. Again, stand for peace, stand up against U.S. and Western aggression. Don't buy the lies and framing of the Western media and the Western imperial press when it comes to the right of the countries of the global South to defend themselves. And, that is what we need to do going forward to prevent future aggression and to put pressure on our own politicians, our own political systems, and our own political parties to back away from what has been complete and utter impunity in terms of Western imperialist aggression. Anyway, hope everyone is well. Love and love and solidarity to all my comrades and to all our comrades around the world. Wishing you all the best on this Monday afternoon, and hope to see you again soon.